Gardner explained. Burns glanced at Charles Watkins, his director of national intelligence. "We need Dr. Gardner's advice," Watkins said. Burns nodded, careful not to let his disapproval show. If Watkins wanted Gardner to sit in on the briefing, he should have gotten his permission beforehand. The post of Director of National Intelligence was new, and Watkins was newly appointed, but Burns was already irritated by the way the man was constantly taking authority into his own hands. Well, we'll eventually find out why Gardner was called here, Burns thought, collecting himself. In recent years, he'd worked hard at controlling his sudden outbursts of temper. "Sir, the daily intelligence briefing," Watkins said, pulling some papers out of a leather binder. This was a summary, prepared by the intelligence community, detailing activities over the last 24 hours. The first two items dealt with the wars Burns had begun in the Middle East. The wars in Iraq and Afghanistan weren't going well. Security in Iraq was deteriorating, while in Afghanistan, hidden terrorist cells were still at large, and U.S. casualties were mounting. The number of U.S. war dead and Burns's rising unpopularity were both trending upward. Burns now regretted having swallowed whole his defense secretary's advice, which put only a fifth of the number of troops on the ground that the Army Chief of Staff had requested. 100,000 U.S. troops had been enough to overthrow the dictator and take over this small country. But they were unequal to the task of restoring order now that they were an occupation force. The third item was an even more disturbing report. The CIA suspected that there were double agents at work among their paramilitary personnel in the Middle East. The director of the CIA, Robert Holland, asked for permission to speak. "We're seeing a type of intelligence leak we've never seen before. If our suspicions are correct, there is one individual who is leaking intelligence, not to an enemy country, but to a human rights organization." "An NGO?" "Correct. He's leaking intelligence about our extraordinary renditions program." Burns looked sullen as he listened to the details. "Let's get the Council of the President involved before we discuss this again." "Of course," Holland said. The fourth item concerned a leader of one of the coalition countries who was suffering from depression and unable to carry out his duties. The report stated that it was only a matter of time before there was a change in leadership, but that this shouldn't affect the country's friendly relations with the United States. They turned the page to the next two items on the report, and as Burns listened to the explanations, they arrived at the final page and the following heading: "The possibility of the extinction of the human race. A new life form appears in Africa." Burns looked up from his binder. "What is this, a Hollywood screenplay?" Only the Chief of Staff smiled at the President's little joke. The others were silent, unable to hide their bewilderment. Burns fixed his gaze on the Director of National Intelligence. Watkins held his gaze without flinching. "It's a report from the NSA," he said. Burns suddenly recalled an earlier incident in which a deadly virus outbreak had occurred in Reston, a D.C. suburb. The U.S. Army Medical Research Institute of Infectious Diseases and the Centers for Disease Control had worked together to contain the deadly virus, a form of Ebola. This incident must be something similar. He read on. "A new type of life form has appeared in the tropical rainforests of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. If it spreads, this life form will pose a threat to the United States and may lead to the extinction of all mankind. This type of situation has already been monitored in the Heisman Report from the Schneider Institute, which was submitted in 1975. Burns carefully read through the information and then leaned back on the sofa. It was clear now why the Science and Technology Advisor had been summoned to the meeting. He couldn't help making a sarcastic joke. "Are you sure they didn't mistake Islamic extremists for this new life form?" Watkins remained matter-of-fact. "This is reliable intel. We've had specialists analyze it, and they believe—" "Enough," Burns said, interrupting. He found the report offensive. Not just the contents, but its very existence, which he couldn't stomach. "I'd like to hear what Dr. Gardner has to say."